I'm Rashanah Baldwin, an award-winning TV and radio journalist, Chicagoan, and millennial. Someone You Need to Know explores the personal stories and journeys of trendsetters, tastemakers, societal change agents, and industry leaders. My goal is to introduce and connect you to everyday people doing impactful work across the country whose stories are often overlooked by the masses and often untold. Here's someone you need to know. Good morning, Dr. Amara Enyia. How are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I am well during these crazy, wonderful, interesting times in our world and our city. So, you are a strategist, social innovation, and social impact professional, and public policy expert. For those who are sleeping under a rock and may not know who Dr. Amara Enyia is, you are also a millennial, a Chicagoan, and you're doing a lot of great work on all fronts in terms of public policy. You ran for office, mayor in 2015, then you ran again in 2019. Let's start there. What are we seeing in our current city with the current mayor who you ran against, Lori Lightfoot? How is she doing so far? How is the city doing so far as we are now in 2021?
Well, it's been the last couple of years have really been unprecedented. And when we think about what's happening around the world with the pandemic that no one could have predicted. And so anyone who won the 2019 election was going to be faced with some challenges that perhaps no previous mayor would have had to deal with. And so there's that sort of overlay in assessing where the city is. I think, one of the biggest things that I've heard and just kind of keeping an ear on the ground and seeing how people are reacting and responding to this administration is that there's a lot of disappointment. I think people were led to believe that, things would be one way and they're not. And that's just a testament to how campaigns, you can say whatever you want in a campaign, and whether or not you actually do what you say that you will do, or whether the values that you claim are real, you won't know until that person gets into office. I mean, I'm a firm believer that past practice is the best predictor for future performance. So track record is important. So if you talk about justice, if you talk about equity, if you talk about inclusion, you should have a track record that backs up the things that you say. We obviously didn't have that in this case. And so, and also just the dynamics of the election. I mean, there were, I think, 14 candidates all vying for attention and time and audience. And so it's hard for just any citizen to be able to clear through what's rhetoric and what's real. And so, 2 years on, there's a lot of disappointment. I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened in a way that was not the case in 2019 or even in 2020. And so now I think Chicago just has to, you recognize the kind of leadership that you have and make the necessary adjustments.
Would you ever run again?
Well, I mean, I'm a believer that there are so many different ways to be able to contribute and have impact. I'm not one of those people that feels the itch to run for any and every office. I'm very particular about how I use my time and the things that I put my efforts toward. And the reasons for me running were always very much internal. It was just, it was an internal sense of this is something that needs to be done. So I'm not sure what the future holds. I'm quite content now with the things that are on my plate and with my trajectory thus far. But one thing I know for sure is I'm always going to be a champion for the people. I'm always going to be a champion for the marginalized, and I'm always going to be a champion for the working class.
Would you recommend people our age, the younger generation, millennials, run for office, run for this specific office?
Sure. I mean, I think
everything you went through.
Well, I mean, interestingly, given my experience, I understand why they don't. I understand why people are hesitant. People don't know even a fraction of what it actually meant running for mayor. They don't know what I experienced running for office. They may have seen snippets and things, but you really don't have a clue. But from what they've seen, I know, I've heard people tell me, I could never go through that. I could never put myself out there like that. I could never deal with the level of just foolishness or craziness, especially because of Chicago's unique brand of politics. And I understand that. I'm cut a little bit differently. So the things that I'm willing to withstand because of the values of justice, particularly around justice, are so important to me. There are things that I'm willing to withstand that I know my peers aren't. I just say everyone has a right to be in a position where they can make decisions that are in the interest of the people. I don't think that running for office should be exclusionary to where only the people who have money or only those who are politically ambitious should ever run. I think everyone has the right to run, but you better know who you are before you run. That's the most important thing that I would say. Know who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it before you run for office. That's what I would tell folks.
City So Real is a documentary that's out that you're in, and a lot of the individuals who ran for mayor in 2019. And it opens a lot of eyes, in my opinion, to people who ran for office who shouldn't have run for office. Is that a distract? And I say that I'm laughing too, because it's like, is that a distraction when you, as I asked the question earlier, would you recommend people our age run? Is it a distraction, or does it hurt or help us when you run for office, or a candidate runs for office and has no qualifications? And I guess what makes someone qualified, but the experience. Is that a distraction from the people who could have won or who should have eased up and we wouldn't have 100 people in that race?
Well, it was definitely much more difficult because of the number of people, the number of candidates who ran. But I think that it reveals some deeper, more systemic problems in the democratic process, namely the fact that money really is the biggest factor. It's the biggest determinant as to who will be successful. I mean, you have people and you have money. And money plays such an outsized role in everything from being able to get on the ballots to getting the advertising, whether in television or otherwise. And so because of that, candidates who would be wonderful, people who would be wonderful, don't even get a foot in the door of the process, even the most qualified, because they're kept out because they don't have money. Because I believe that everyone has the right to run, I can be annoyed that there's, this vast cast of characters. But at the end of the day, it's like, what can you do? All you can do is do your best, try to get your message out, stick to your message and your platform. And again, know why you're running. Everyone has their own motive and their own agendas, some great, some not so great, but you have your race to run. I think to the extent that we really recognize how money influences who gets a chance to even run for office. I mean, and it came up in the election, not just the money to run for office, but even who we think is qualified. There's this sort of perverse notion that people who are wealthy are just somehow more qualified to run for office or more qualified to be in positions where, for example, mayor. I mean, that was a big issue for me, especially coming out of background of community work. Like, I intentionally chose a career to advocate for people in a way that was not going to be lucrative, right? And then we've had previous mayors who were millionaires, who ran the city into the ground financially, who made all of the wrong decisions for the city. And yet you still have this question, can someone run if they're not a millionaire, or if they had financial challenges? And then you think about average Chicagoans, where median income in some communities is $35,000, where people are struggling, especially in the last couple of years, to pay rent, to buy medicine. And you start to wonder, why do we have this sense that only the folks who are millionaires, who are most disconnected from the reality of the majority of Chicagoans, are so-called qualified to run? And I think those kinds of myths have to be shattered so that we can actually open the door to people of other backgrounds. And then again, once you get in, you just have to run your race the best that you can.
Activism is in your blood, literally. You have an impressive resume, experience from your parents, you being activists and from Nigeria, am I correct?
Sure, yep.
You fight for social justice on all fronts, and I hope you don't beat me up for saying this. Where's the book? I often what's the activist who wrote the playbook? I feel like you can write or even create a guide on how to get involved on all fronts. Speak it to the generation younger than us, the millennials. We're millennials, but young millennials and younger. What would you say to them to really get involved, get active? Why is it needed? And what does it really mean to challenge the status quo? Because we saw a lot of protests erupt over the summer, and we saw a lot of infiltration and provocateurs that led some of our own people to making messed up decisions. If you could give a sentence or a 3-step or a 5-step of where do you start, how do you truly make an impact, and what does it look like to challenge the status quo?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's always struck me is how the limitations that people put on their own lives when you open yourself up to messages about what you can't do, what you're not qualified to do, what you're not rich enough to do, what you're not, you're too Black to do, like all of these things. That's always struck me, because people should be able to do the things that speak to their spirit. And so for me, one of the reasons why my career path and really my life path looks the way that it does is because I've always been guided by my spirit, my gut. I've always been mission driven. So when I went to law school, when I got my PhD, all of the things that I've done, the goal in my mind wasn't how much money can I make. It was how can I amass a toolbox so that I can really address these issues that affect people, so that everyone can live up to their human potential. And that created a path that was not going to be easy, right? I could easily have gone and worked at some law firm and made, a lot of money, live in a condo downtown and forget about the injustices that exist all around us. But I've never been inclined to be that way. And so I made decisions that perhaps were, if you could say, harmful in the financial sense, but in the spirit sense, I never wavered, and I was never dissuaded from those decisions, because I knew the impact of what I could do, that I had something to offer. And I think people, especially young people, need to tap into themselves first, tune in first, know who you are and what drives you first, so that you don't allow other people's limitations to be projected onto you. And then that ends up guiding the decisions that you make in life. If you're going to challenge the status quo, especially in Chicago of all places, you have to be grounded. You have to have a strong anchoring, because it is not easy. There are, this is a city of a multi-billion-dollar budget. There are decades of power structures in place that are vested in keeping things as they are. So to challenge that, for me, people were saying, oh my gosh, you're never going to work again. You'll never get a job. They'll say this about you. And to me, it was like, no, those things don't drive my destiny. Like, I'm going to do what speaks to me and according to these values, and we'll see how it plays out. But you can't go wrong when you're fighting on the side of justice. And that's played out that way. So I think people should tune into themselves first, know who you are, do that inner work, because then that guides what you do externally. And also, it doesn't have to be big, running for office or running for mayor. Certainly, you don't need to start there. It's the little things. I talk to people on my block. That's the first sphere of influence. I clean up my street corner. There's just little ways of having impact that are behind the scenes, that aren't getting press and publicity, but you can have impact in many different ways. So that's what I would tell young people, especially if they're coming up and thinking about how they want to deploy the gifts that they have.
What is needed for cities like Chicago, specifically in the communities, the Black and Brown communities, to be really equitable and thriving? I guess that question, to break it down, even make it more specific. What makes a community thriving? What is the basic needs of a community to make it a thriving, economic driven neighborhood community?
Well, we see it all the time. It's a community, it's a neighborhood where you have access to green space, where people have access to jobs, they're working, they have housing, they're stable. They can shop, get things that they need, clothing, shoes, what have you, is in close proximity. They have access to a grocery store. They feel safe, a sense of safety and security. Those are the things that are necessary for a thriving community. Those are the things that you experience in a thriving community. The challenge has been that so many communities have been disinvested and ignored with intention, because we have public policies that actually, privilege some communities over others, and particularly Black communities in Chicago, particularly brown communities in Chicago, have borne the brunt of that. And so the first thing is to recognize that we deserve what everyone else gets, and not approach this work as though we're asking for something extra, or we should be hesitant to ask. No, we should be demanding the best, because if you feel like, we should all feel like we deserve the best, and are in fact entitled to the best. So that's always been my sort of how I've perceived these inequities that we see in Chicago.
What flashed through my mind, my head, literally, when you were breaking down like what is needed to make a community thriving and equitable, when you said the policy piece, the public policy piece, that's broken policy that works against us. Everyone knows I'm from Inglewood, and we fight for the same basic needs of the community. And it wasn't until I feel like I finally got the aha of the community activists from, I call them the OGs, when Kennedy King College was being built, the new Kennedy King College was being built in the city of Chicago colleges. They had to protest for the workers, to the construction guys who live in Inglewood, give us the fair shake, give us the right of first refusal, give us the hire within the community. And it was, and they made some threats like, oh, if we keep seeing Wisconsin license plates and Indiana license plates, it's gonna be a problem. And they were making some threats that I probably shouldn't, say, but it was like, if you don't hire, if we don't start seeing, so it's like, why is that, Amara, that we as Blacks always have to fight for our basic needs, our basic quality housing, education, food, and we have to fight those public policies that are so messed up?
It's unfortunate. It's the history of this country. Unfortunately, it's the history of our city. It's the history really of the world. When you think about racial capitalism and exploitation, when you think about the transatlantic slave trade, when you think about what's happening on the continent and how these nations were formed to be colonies to enrich European countries. I mean, it's unfortunately the evil that has been around for such a long time. And so we have a choice to make. Do we fight those injustices? Do we speak truth? Do we push for what we deserve? Or do we accept things as they are? I just happen to be of the mind that I don't accept the status quo. I don't accept things as they are. I don't accept these systems because I know that there are better systems. And the same creative power that it took to create the systems that we live in now can be undone, and better ones can be created. But we have to recognize that we have that power. I think for Black folks in particular, sometimes it's hard when you live in a city or a country that constantly attempts to devalue you, and through every means possible tries to delegitimize or minimize or make you feel as though there's some deficit to being Black. But my position is I feel grateful and thankful to be Black. Sometimes I just think, man, thank goodness. I'm glad to be Black, right? And I deserve the best. And I think Black folks have to approach this work from a position of entitlement, especially Black Americans. You can't build this entire country and then have to, and feel hesitant to demand the things that you are entitled to. So that sort of, it's a position of the mind and heart that I think would guide our advocacy. So we're not approaching this from the position of hierarchy, like we have to look up to these people and hopefully some crumbs will drop off the table. No, I don't even need that table. Let me just get my stuff so I can build my own table that's suitable for how I want to live, right? And so that influences how you advocate. And frankly, for me, it's part of the reason why I'm not easily dissuaded or scared by the power structure of people who have money or titles, because I come from a culture of egalitarianism where no man is above, no man or woman is above the other. So I can't see anyone as above, especially if the way that you got there is through injustice or, evil means. I can't respect that. And so I think Black folks should say, just don't hesitate to be entitled to the things that Black people deserve, whether here in Chicago, whether in the States or globally.
Another flash through my head, to your point, and I was in a meeting in Inglewood, and the secretary, it was interaction with this white Caucasian who's like a C-suite, who's like, so like hi, like just really mesmerized by the what the Black people were doing in the meeting. And the secretary said to me, she was like, all of a sudden we just trendy now. We're just Black girl magic. She said, now, being a Black woman is so trendy. Black girl magic is real. She was like, and she was joking, but she was right. I'm like, yeah, we're just so trendy. Everybody wants to marry us, date us, wants us to run for office. I'm like, yeah, it really is great. And then to your second point of that entitlement, again, I never call myself a community activist because I feel like they act, especially the millennials and the younger generation who jump in front of the cameras for the Getty's image to make. So I always say organizing, that term of like, feel like when we're entitled, I feel like I had a aha waking up moment maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. I don't care who thinks about it. I'm free. And I used to say this, I'm free. My ancestors signed my freedom papers years ago. And I was really proud when I got kicked out of an alderman's meeting. I'm like, I am doing something right. I was like, I am doing something right. When this alderman kicked me out of it, I don't give a. I'm like, and then us, just being smart and knowing, your stuff and having education. Like, and if you try to come for me, I'm gonna go to the attorney general and I'm gonna do this, and I know how to navigate. But that sense of entitlement is absolutely right. Of that attitude is like, don't go get yourself in trouble or arrested, but we are free. We built this country. Our ancestors worked hard for us. So I've carried that attitude since, like, I'm not taking no, and forget your table. I'm gonna create my own table and I'm gonna kick the door in. And Black privilege is really real. And you to like really thinking differently. I feel like that's what you're saying. Like thinking, shifting that narrative of we're oppressed. Like, no, we built this country. I'm entitled to this country. I am entitled to this American dream. So
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mindset shift, and revolutions are revolutions of the mind first. And so as we, it's recognizing that shift in mindset, and also that there are many lanes and we need all lanes full. I definitely understand, there are those who, they like the limelight, they like to be out front. I happen to not be one of those people. I'm quite the opposite. So for years, you probably wouldn't even know where I was, because I'm just gonna, I just don't, that's not my orientation. There are those who that's what they do. I think the challenge for the community, especially the Black community, is to recognize what everyone is able to contribute. What lane do you fill? Are you a grenade thrower? Because we do need that. Right? Power in this country has never conceded by politely asking for things. It just hasn't. So you do need the ones who are going to agitate. You definitely need the policy folks who can draft up better policies. You need the folks who are going to be on the picket lines. You need, those who are going to provide the water and cook for the people on the front lines. There are so many lanes to fill, and we all have to do our part. And if we do our part, those who are doing the work, they don't really have the capacity to complain about those who aren't doing the work. Now, sometimes there are people or things that inhibit the work or kind of can mess up the plans a little bit. But again, here's how I'm going to contribute. This is the best that I can do. Let me focus on that, and hopefully everything else will fall into place.
absolutely, absolutely. Jump into what happened last week, January 6th, in our nation's capital. What is your reaction to that? And what would you say to Black people about that fight and about that storming of the Capitol and almost killing our democracy?
Well, I mean, there's so many thoughts, so many thoughts. I think the biggest thing was, for me, was pointing out the hypocrisy of policing as an institution. I think for so many years, people criticized those who had issues with the policing system and criminal justice reform, tried to minimize those voices. And what we saw only legitimized all of the things that have been said, that activists have said for years about the hypocrisy of the policing system, that it is an institution that values lives based on skin color, and that those who, white people, are not treated the same as Black folks, Indigenous folks, Latinos, whomever in this country. And you saw that as the police were escorting people down, genteelly escorting people downstairs. They were opening up the gates. You just saw that hypocrisy on display. And so for me, the response, my initial response was not, I hope that they get shot and killed. I hope the police go and shoot. No, that's not my response at all, because that language is easily flipped and used against Black folks. If we're saying they need to shoot them, they need to shoot them. Well, usually what the state does is they use those same tactics on Black people, as we've seen throughout this country's history. My response is to say this legitimizes the calls for the overturning of this entire system, because this system has never served the people. And it also showed that the allegiance was not even to police. For the white nationalists that were there, I mean, their allegiance is to white nationalism. It's not to police, it's not to Republicans or Democrats or any ideology. It's to anything that serves whiteness. And that's why you saw DC Capitol Police getting attacked. One of them, I think, was even killed by these people that stormed the Capitol. And that is, to me, something that people should take note of. The other thing is, thinking about the role that the United States has played in actually fomenting coups around the world. And so when we talk about democracy, what kind of democracy? It's questionable whether we are even existing in a democracy. And that same democracy that's become so fragile, I heard that phrase repeated over and over, our democracy is fragile, but this is the so-called democracy that you use the military to go to Central and South America and overthrow governments, to go into Africa and overthrow governments, to have leaders assassinated so that you could install people that are in line with this kind of democracy. So there's a lot of introspection, I think, that other countries even have to do as they see this democracy as fragile as it is, and recognize that they've mimicked a system that clearly has not been, perhaps is not the ideal for their context. So all of that is what I saw, as I was, witnessing the storming of the Capitol. I also, though, think that this isn't the end of that movement, that work, what people started there. And I don't think that the people that were at the Capitol were the real people that we really need to be concerned about. I think it's the true believers who are mobilizing around state capitals now, and who saw DC as a trial balloon to say, okay, well, we see how the police didn't respond. We see how they were treated, and they're emboldened to now use that same strategy elsewhere around the country. I think that's a very real concern.
Shift somewhat to the word of defunding the police. React to that.
Defund the police. I mean, it's clear. It is, I think people are uncomfortable with the clarity of the mandate. It came up out of the uprisings. It really emerged out of the uprisings, but people have been calling for defunding the police and investing in communities, investing in the things that build strong people and strong communities. And so when we talk about disinvested communities in Chicago, we think about the fact that they have cut, funding for education is cut, the Department of Environment in its entirety was cut, Chicago Park districts and the programs that are available to young people have been cut. Everything else is mental health services were defunded. 6 of them closed in 2012, and still people fell through the cracks. So many other departments that are actually crucial to building strong individuals and strong communities have been defunded. Yet we've seen the police budget, public safety budget is now 40% of Chicago's overall budget. year after year, that funding is increased. And where has that gotten us? This year, we had record homicides. We had record shootings. The clearance rate for murders is abysmally low. And so what are we getting for the level of investment that is going into policing versus what we could get if we actually invested in the departments, human services, housing, mental health services, economic investment in our communities? Those are the things that actually address the issue of violence. Policing is reactionary. It does not stop violence. It is not the cure for violence. Investing in all of those other public policy areas is what actually addresses violence. So my question is, how many years of funding does it take for us to recognize that the status quo is not working? There's been no attempts to defund the police department, to shift funding from policing to these other areas at all. And so look at the stats. They speak for themselves. So people's initial gut reaction to me was defunding. That means what's going to happen in our communities? Oh, well, they get 40% of the budget. What's happening now? Let's talk about that. What do we do now that they're getting $1.7, $1.8 billion? What do we do now that hundreds of millions of dollars in police misconduct cases are making your property taxes go up, are making you have to pay more in tickets, are making you have to pay more in fees? Let's have that conversation. Then come back to me and let's talk honestly about what defunding and investing in communities and investing in individuals would look like and how that would benefit us. We have to have good faith conversations. And I think once people stop having a knee-jerk reaction about defunding, then we can have those honest conversations. But I also like to imagine a community that doesn't need police presence, constant police presence. They exist. You can go to certain neighborhoods in Chicago and see communities that don't have police on every corner, sirens flashing. They exist. Around the country, they exist. And so instead of our default being, oh my gosh, if we don't have police, we're gonna devolve into chaos. It's so much more beautiful to me to imagine a community that is so robust and so safe and so, thriving that we don't even have to think about police. That's how I want to orient myself.
Can we have both? Can we have, when I hear you say shifting the budget, can we have both where they're not necessarily defunded, but the money is removed to bring in resources to assist them, the mental health issues, the mental health experts who are accompanying them to crime scenes? Is there a such thing as a happy medium with that? I know a lot of cops who are good friends of mine, they reacted, they was upset about it, but then on the other side, which I think the wording is often off and people don't understand what that really means, but I think money needs to be shifted to help these communities, to help them do a better job, to help them help us, help you all.
Yeah, and the defunding, it's shifting those resources. It is shifting them to the areas where they're needed. We expect police to be social workers, mental health crisis intervention specialists, babysitters. Mm-hmm. Our public policy failings are the reason why we foist so much on their shoulders. So defunding is actually saying, instead of shifting all of our resources plus the blame and all of our shifting that to police, we actually do need to fund housing. We do need to expand our mental health capacity. We do need to expand economic investment so that people have jobs. We do need to address substance abuse in communities. When we do that, when we address those public policy issues, it actually makes the role of police it narrows down the scope of their work. So we're not expecting them to have to respond to every public policy failing. That's what's happening now. So I understand that the initial reaction is defensive, and no one likes to think that, resources are going to be taken away or the idea of things being taken from you. But when you actually sit and think about what that means, that these resources are going into the things that will make your job easier, then it's like, okay, now we can start to unpack what that looks like. But it requires us to not be consumed with the knee-jerk reaction. I think when some of the conversations that I've had, and I know, plenty of police officers. I had worked in my community work, 15th district, the 11th district. There are many individuals that are exemplary as individuals, but it doesn't take away from how these institutions need to be changed. And when in previous years, people were saying reform, reform, but we just had a case of a woman who was barged into, battering ram in her house, lied to, kept from getting evidence, humiliated. That's what reform has gotten us. So at some point, I think about that, and I think about, well, the status quo is not going to give her the dignity that was taken from her. It's not going to give Laquan McDonald his life back. It's not going to give Quintonio LaGrier his life. It's not going to give Rakia Boyd her life back. Right. So we've got to step out of ourselves and objectively unpack what shifting resources means and how it actually helps all parties involved. And more importantly, how it addresses the root causes of violence and dysfunction in ways that are long-term and sustainable, because that's not what we have now with the status quo.
Our new administration, Biden and Kamala, Biden and Harris, how can we hold them accountable as Blacks and Browns? And is this a time for reckoning and healing?
Well, I have to say, because there have been so many calls for unity and healing, and I just firmly believe you don't get to healing without justice. You don't get to healing without accountability. You don't get to healing without the truth. And I feel that everyone wants to sort of rush to healing without doing the work that can allow healing to take place. So, I mean, we had the election. I think the best time is before an election to make the demands known and to make clear our expectations. Now that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are positions to take office, I think this is the time where we actually go even harder. Having President Trump for 4 years, I think allowed people to sort of foist all of the ills of this country onto his shoulders as though they magically appeared 4 years ago. And those of us who've been in the trenches, like yourself, we know that that's not been the case, that a lot of these issues that we're talking about existed under Democratic administrations, even with majorities in the Senate and House and Democratic president. And for years, they've been, issues that we've been advocating on and fighting and all of that. And so I think the worst thing we could do is to sort of sit back on our haunches and say, well, now Trump's gone, we've got Biden and Harris, we can rest. I think we have to do the opposite. I think we have to actually be much more aggressive in pushing for our demands, pushing those things that were said, that we were told were unrealistic, or that's too much, or no, this is the time where we actually put our foot on the gas. Because one, we do have now a Senate majority, we have a House majority, and we have a Democratic president. So there's no excuse why the things that we're pushing should not be done in this administration. There's no Trump to blame. There's no Republican obstruction to blame. So now we're gonna see what's real and what's not. And I think my inclination is, okay, we've heard all the rhetoric, all of the talk about a new day for America and everything's going to be bright. Well, let's actually see what happens, and let's work with this administration to actually make them live up to the ideals that they spoke about.
I'm putting this out here in fruition into the universe. You should write a book about community organizing and activism and how we can really make an impact. And who I was talking about earlier, I hope you don't get offended, Saul Alinsky.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Rules for Radicals.
You need to do it, Dr. Amara Enyia. You're a millennial. You're everywhere. You've got the education. Well, let me like a forward. Honestly, I say that jokingly, but so seriously. We need a play-by-play book, something not as thick and heady as Saul Alinsky was back in the 50s, but something similar like, this is what you do, A, B, C, D. This is the difference between activism, this is the difference between organizing, this is how they work together. I'm just putting it on your lap to hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that. I have been, especially last year, and once I have more time to actually decompress a little bit, have been writing and just thinking about, and have actively been writing. I'm not sure what the final product is going to be, but it definitely is, you know, thinking about what organizing means, what it looks like. And I have some departures actually from Alinsky's model and his framework, quite frankly, that I think are drastically, well, maybe not drastically, but quite different from what the school of thought that he sort of has put into Chicago's history of organizing and really worldwide. But I do think that, you know, there's a lot I think that I've learned that I do hope can be helpful so that folks who are coming after me can avoid the landmines or at least see them better, and really maximize their impact. So you know, so you're definitely on the right track.
Okay.
You're on the right track.
What's next for you? What's the next thing you're doing? What's the next thing you're working on? Where are you gonna be? What are you doing? I know you're doing a lot of great stuff around the city of Chicago and housing, education. You're on some great boards. So I got a chance to interview people who are part of those different organizations. What's next for you?
Yeah, well, so it's been a really good last year or so. I mean, all pandemic aside, I knew that when I finished running, when I came out of the political season, I knew that I wanted to, two things I said, I wanted to do more national work and I wanted to do more international work. And so I actually started moving that direction. I got involved with the Movement for Black Lives, which is a national membership organization, several hundred organizations around the country and around the world. And we do organizing, electoral justice, policy. So I'm actually the policy and research coordinator for that organization. And we've got major legislation at the federal level, the BREATHE Act, which is the most robust criminal justice reform legislation probably in history, and state coalitions that we're actually forming around the country to push this legislation, including here in Illinois.
Okay.
We also have a massive climate agenda that's going to be coming out this year. So I got involved with the Movement for Black Lives. I'm also at the London School of Economics. I'm always, learning is just a thing. I just enjoy it. And so they have it's a special program for cities where they bring together executives from around the world, just a small group of about 25 of us who are working at NGOs and international organizations or former mayors. And our task is to essentially address the most pressing challenges that cities around the world face. And so, unfortunately, because of travel restrictions, I'm here, but it's actually based in London. And so that's been just an amazing experience, allowing me to get more into the international space, which is what I've always been interested in. And even as I'm doing that, keeping one foot in Chicago and just, being on ground here. So being part of a coalition that's pushing the solidarity economy, pushing economic models that can actually be transformative. That's been really exciting, doing that work around the city. And then, as you mentioned, being on the board of the Chicago Community Loan Fund has been a real joy. It's so much aligned with the work that I enjoy doing. And then I'm on the board of the Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, microfinance group. So again, another aspect in sort of the economic space that I've always been interested in. And then doing work on the continent, like that's, a lot of my family's still there, working with the African Union, working on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest and biggest transformative thing that's happened on the continent in 60 years since the wave of independence. And being front and center in that work has been very exciting, and it's been very fulfilling. So it's, I got a chance to really unpack everything that I had been doing up until the election. And then when the bag is empty after the election, then I could start putting things that I wanted in that bag, if you will. And that has been very fulfilling. And I'm just very excited about it and excited to continue that work.
Awesome. And I hope you will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.